Welcome to the Selling Show, where we unpack, repack, and break down exactly how CEOs, founders, and senior executives sell their ideas, point of view, and personal brand to the people who matter most. This is your host, David Newman, and you are in the right place if you want to build market eminence, amplify your influence, and attract high-value prospects, investors, partners, talent, and media opportunities with less chasing and more confidence. Let's go. Well, Jeremy Shapiro, you are here on the show. We're doing it live. There's no mistakes. There's no screw ups. We're flying without a wire here. But I think we should tell the audience what the heck is going on. So welcome to the Selling Show. I've got the awesome and amazing, the one, the only, the man, the myth, the legend, the author of Your Business Growth Playbook, Mr. Jeremy Shapiro.
Thanks so much for inviting me on the show, David. I'm excited to be here.
You have quite the professional journey. For the people that don't know, and I got to say, Jeremy, I feel sorry for the people that don't know, but there are not going to be any of them left, because my first question is, could you share a little bit about your professional journey that brought you to the work that you're doing today, and what were some fun pit stops and detours along the way?
You know, I've been a serial entrepreneur my entire career. That goes back to having my first real business during even my high school years. And when I say real business, I mean building out a team and a client base and all that, not just being, a solopreneur with one client, right? So I've been at this a while, almost 30 years now, with the gray hair to prove it. And it's been an incredible journey. Every one of my, businesses in that serial entrepreneurship journey has been either a spinoff of an existing business or sort of a sister business supporting the same core customer base. And it's been a wonderful journey. All those businesses have been in the service of fellow entrepreneurs, helping them on their journey towards that entrepreneurial freedom.
So we'll dig into more of the chunks and bits and pieces of that as we go. But I want to talk about some of the really great ideas in your book. We were talking right before we turned the microphones on that you and I are both railing against all of the books that give you the theory and the why and the concepts and the strategies, and they fall short on the how to do it tactical implementation part. So as the do it guy, right, it's tough for me not to admire someone who is a fellow fan of the exactly how to and the tactics. You talk about the book, your strategic growth playbook. You talk about it's aimed at business owners, 7 and 8 figure business owners who have outgrown the hustle and feel like they've plateaued. So I'd love to dig into both halves of that equation. And I'm curious, what are the most surprising underlying causes of that plateau? And also, let's talk about the hustle culture.
It's interesting, right? When we look at business growth over a longer period of time, if we zoom out, what we typically see are growth happens in these like S curves, right? You're sort of flatline, gently heading up, and then there's some spike, some growth. That's the, often admired, loved, and sought after hockey stick. But if you keep looking where the hockey stick goes, it doesn't go to the moon. At some point, that plateaus and flattens out again, right? And if we don't do anything, that often turns into a peak, and we watch the business go downhill from there, right? So for many business owners, what happens is the strategies and tactics and plans that got them to where they are now simply stop working and don't let them get to that next level. I'll share with you an example. One of my earlier businesses, back in the earlier days of Google AdWords, we were putting money into AdWords, trying it out for the business for our very first time. And when we did, we found that for every $1 we spent on AdWords, we get $4 in upfront revenue back in. We had a great 4-to-1 return. So we amped up our ad spend. We went from 10K a month to 20K. And as we did that, we saw our return went from the 4-to-1 to 3-to-1. Now that's still not bad, because we're spending more, we're getting more. We ramped up again to 30,000 in spend, and we were down to somewhere around like 2-to-1. By the time we got to 40, it was about $1 spent got us $1 in the door. So like that strategy stopped scaling. And then here's where it gets worse, is once we got up to that level, we had other channels. We were focusing on other things we were doing in the business, and we stopped monitoring, watching, and managing that. And next thing you know, that same ad spend, suddenly we spent $1, and get 50 cents back in. And now we're starting to lose money on the upfront. Now, thankfully, this was a business with a strategy I talk a lot about in the book. We had continuity, so we knew it wasn't about that one-time upfront sale, but it was taking us longer and longer and longer to make back what we spent to acquire that customer.
Yeah.
So this is one of those things that for that business to keep growing, we need to add on other strategies and other channels so that we could acquire customers in different ways, because that strategy had plateaued. And we see that same kind of thing in businesses all the time. One sales channel, one partner, one affiliate relationship, something that got you that big bump just stops producing at a certain point and is no longer scalable. So that's usually the biggest issue, is that what worked to get you here isn't going to get you there, and you've really plateaued on top of that curve.
And then as far as outgrown the hustle, I mean, obviously the first thing that comes to mind is, you're spending all this money on whatever advertising, whatever lead generation, whatever strategy, and it stops working or it flatlines. And then you just throw up your hands. And then it's like, well, I've given up on the hustle. And you're not saying that. You're not saying give up, but you are saying, I think, give up on the brute force, exhausting, smacking your head against the same wall over and over and over again. But I think also some founders and some CEOs, they're kind of addicted to the hustle. How do you help them reprogram and say, hey, it doesn't have to be this exhausting monkey work that you're constantly doing 14 hours a day?
Yeah, there's this really toxic hustle culture that's out there. And it's, I'd say, the noisier side of what you see online. In videos and books, when you hear people presenting from stage, they're often saying these really terrible things like, while you're sleeping, your competition is stealing your customers, right? And every moment you're not spending in the business, someone else is out there stealing your lunch money. And it's this fear-based approach that drives founders to be working these 120-hour weeks, thinking that's what's going to grow their business. But that is not a scalable approach. You can't continue to just pile on hours and get more results. So at some point, you're going to realize, if you haven't already, that hustle is not a sustainable model for long-term growth. Sure, for our first-time founders or earlier stage in your business, you're trying to launch and get off the ground, or for compressed cycles now and then, all right, you put in a little extra time. But if you zoom out, where are our businesses really going? All businesses end up in one of three places, right? One, this is a more older school model. You pass the business on to your kids. You have a multi-generational business. If you ask yourself in your heart of hearts, are you really building a business to pass on to your kids? And if you think you are, do your kids want that business, right? That is usually almost always not the case, right? So let's just scratch that one off the board. The other direction, and this is where most businesses go, is they end up closing up shop, right? Revenues slide down, the business owner passes away, decides to just put the close sign on there and be out of business. And that's kind of sad to think about. This thing you've built that's been so important, that is, you've hustled so hard to build, is just no longer. But that is sadly where most businesses go. Your third option is you're building a business so it can scale, so it can grow, so maybe you sell it at some point, or you run it for a while as more of a lifestyle business, right? These are your two more common paths for a business when an owner has intentionality behind it and is looking to truly build something. So if we posit that we're actually building a business that is not meant to take up every beyond waking moment of our lives, but the business is meant to be an income producing asset that serves us, that grows in its value and then can be sold, right? Now we have a very different approach. Now we start thinking about, will a potential acquirer want to be buying a business that's really a glorified job that's going to require they put in 120 hours a week? Probably not. Yeah. If you have a business that's requiring your endless time pouring in, is that supporting the life that you like now and or in the future? Probably not. Yeah. So what if instead we created businesses that supported our goals outside of the business, right? What if instead we use the best practices of the business owners who've come before us to create thriving, cash flow producing businesses that they can then exit, that don't require them working like that? So there's a great approach to building a business, and I'm not talking this has to be a 4-hour work week sort of thing, right? You can build a business that has guardrails, that has parameters, that supports you and what you want to build. And that takes the right strategies and tactics.
Quick public service announcement. Did you know, in addition to being a charming and wonderful podcast host, I also work with clients privately? Book your Market Eminence Roadmap call right now at doitmarketing.com/call. Here's what we'll do. It's 30 minutes. We're going to get clarity on exactly where you are with 3 key strategies: differentiation, positioning, and pricing. Build your personalized roadmap for market eminence. Identify bottlenecks and gaps that have gotten in the way, and discuss next steps to help you make it happen. That's doitmarketing.com/call. Now, back to the episode. In the book, Jeremy, you talk about the 3 key levers framework. Share a little bit about each one and how they sort of work together to build that kind of scalable business that is not exhausting to run.
Yeah, there's a few very simple formulas I cover in the book. Don't worry, this is not a math book. There's really, really easy formulas, all right? So one thing we talked about earlier on as a foundational concept is understanding what your customer lifetime value is, right? If you don't know what a customer is worth for your business, you don't know how much you can spend to acquire them. And if you are in a single transaction business where all the work you do gets you one transaction with one customer one time, you're going to spend all your time out there hunting, looking for that next hit. No. And that's really challenging. That doesn't allow you to take your foot off the gas in the business because you've constantly got to be out there bringing in that new customer for that one-time transaction. Yeah. Right. So if we step back and look at how we increase that customer lifetime value, now we can focus on getting more customers, but we can also optimize how much revenue we have in our relationship with each individual customer. Right. So when we know our CLV, our customer lifetime value, we can outspend our competition to acquire them. We can better, more strategically work with our customer acquisition cost, or a CAC, right? And a lot of that comes down to the simple formula I have in the book. Your F times your A times your Q is what gives you your gross revenue in the business, right? Now, what's interesting about these 3 variables in my FAQ formula is these aren't additive. So it's not like if you increase 1, right, you've just increased that 1. It's actually multiplicative. What that means is as you increase these numbers, you're multiplying it out, just like with compound interest, right? When you have a base number that you invest dollar-wise, you then get interest back on that. And if you continue to get that same rate of return, right, that return you're getting applies also to everything you've earned. This is why, like, the earlier you start investing or saving, right, the more that money can grow. The same concept of multiplying your numbers applies in this FAQ formula as well. And so one of them, Q, we're all familiar with. That's the quantity of customers you have. Every book you're reading about business growth is going to be focused on that. It's going to be talking about sales channels, marketing, what you can do to get more customers in the door. That's how most of us think about growing our business. Yeah. And so I cover that a little bit in the book, yes, because it's important, but it's a well-covered topic. The other areas, the F and the A, that's where the real magic happens. Right? Increasing either of those levers, even a little bit, has this multiplicative effect. And I think this was really well illustrated by the British cycling team. Now, I'm an avid road cyclist myself, so like this story especially hit home for me. But this was a cycling team that was doing terrible. They were like one of the worst teams in the world. However, they made an important change. They brought in a new head coach who brought in this idea of incremental or marginal gains. So what they looked at is all the small things, because right, all the other teams were doing all the big things you could do. Everyone was doing that. That's sort of table stakes. But they were looking at what are the small changes we can make in our team to make a difference. For example, what if we have all of our racers wash their hands before they eat? I mean, we take that as common sense, but if they could reduce the number of times their cyclists got colds, that would be a week or 2 more training, less colds to circulate through the team, right? That would keep them at their peak for longer. Maybe that gets them like a 1% improvement. What if, and I love this one, they painted the insides of their trucks white? Well, when you paint the inside of the trucks white, you'll notice more easily if there's dirt or dust that can get into the gears and the actual parts of the bicycle, and little bit by little bit could slow it down or cause problems. So all these little tiny things they look at, from nutrition to sleep to training, all these things. And they're looking for these little 1% gains. But you know what happens when you get a little 1% gain each day? They don't just add up over time, it actually multiplies. And that took them from being one of the worst teams in the world to world champions. The simple concept of the marginal gains. And so we apply the exact same concept in your business, is using the tactics I cover that improve each one of those three variables, your F, your A, and your Q. You don't just apply one tactic and say, I fixed my business. No, those S curves we were talking about before, those actually stack, right? The end of one S is the tail or start of that next S. And your goal is to stack those up by going back and applying tactic after tactic to keep the business growth happening.
I'm wondering if, going back to the plateaus for a second, in light of what you just said, are there certain revenue levels where these plateaus tend to occur? So, for example, I remember years ago, I forget who said it, but there was some guru observed that it's the threes and the tens. So, for example, and perhaps you even know who it was, 300K, right, to 1 million, right? So a 300K is one plateau. Next plateau is 1 million. Next plateau after that is 3 million and 10 million, right? And so keep going with the threes and the tens. Well, the next thing is going to be 30 million, and you're stuck at 30 million. Next plateau, 100 million. Can't get past 100 million. Whether it's the threes and tens or something else, have you noticed with your clients and audiences, are there typical stages and phases where this is more likely to get stuck?
Yeah, so the threes and ones, as I know that, is sort of the common industry knowledge. And I love that you mentioned that as well. That's usually what I bring up is your threes and ones, right? And so especially early on, it's like getting to that first 10,000 can be challenging. Then the 30, then the 100,000, then 300,000, and so on, right? So this day and age, with where we are with online businesses and so forth, you can have solopreneur businesses pulling in low seven figures, right? And that's without any virtual assistants or staff or support and so on.
Yeah.
Now, those are fewer and fewer the higher those revenue numbers get, because at some point, depending on your business model, you are probably bringing on and expanding out your team. So most of the folks that I work with are usually at that point of they have a small team in place already, right? Or they are looking to grow beyond being just a solopreneur and scale. And I commonly see one of those big plateaus comes when a business owner has tapped out their own time and doesn't yet know how to bring on additional team members, or has some mental blocks, and that usually comes down to a few common issues around bringing on an additional team member, virtual assistant, employee, contractor, whatever, right? That's usually what can start to get you as a business owner unstuck and back into a growth mode, is pulling you off the front line and having someone else doing the work of the business day to day. So you can either step back and have a business that runs on autopilot, or you can reinvest your time into doing the important work on the business to get back to growth.
Yeah.
Right? So that's usually one of those stages I see as solopreneur to small business owner. And then from there, we get into the whole different world of systems and processes and all that lets you really scale up to multi-location or multi-team, or having a level of management and systems between the business owner and the front line.
I'm curious, you mentioned in the book that there are some magic levers that either are already in a business and need to be magnified, or they need to be installed in a business that maybe was never thinking this way. So you mentioned, for example, the one-off, one-time transaction, never to be seen again. That is not a sustainable model. So recurring revenue, customer stickiness, churn reduction. Talk to us about what that new era of business model would and could look like.
Yeah, when we look at the really established, Fortune 50 companies, a lot of them do a ton of what I cover in the playbook, right? That a smaller business, your sub 8-figure business, typically isn't yet doing all these tactics in the playbook. So I'll give you an example. You touched on this idea of bringing in recurring revenue.
Yeah.
So now you have a customer who doesn't just pay you once, but they're paying you monthly or ongoing in some format to do business with you. So once we're doing that, now we get to start looking at this word you mentioned called churn, right? And churn, for our listeners who haven't heard this before, simply comes down to you look at how many members, we'll call them that, you have at the start of a period, and then what percentage you lose over that time period. So let's say you're looking at monthly numbers. We'll keep it easy. You start the month with 1,000 subscribers and you lose, you say 10 of them over the month. Right? You have 1% churn. You've churned and lost 1%. It doesn't matter how many you gained during that month. We're just looking at the loss. So what do we do with that? Well, first of all, like anything else, Peter Drucker says, what we measure, we can manage, right? So if we measure and dashboard this number, now we can look to move the needle on this and we can see what impacts that. So let's say a customer stays with you on average 10 months and they're paying you $50 a month. You now know that their customer lifetime value is the $50 times 10 is $500. If we can figure out how to keep them with you 2 additional months, that's an additional $100 in your pocket, right? That's a 20% increase in your customer lifetime value just by finding a way to reduce your churn. And we cover a lot of those in the book. There's 4 big reasons customers churn, and we cover what you can do to address those, right? So we can look at the churn side of things. We can also look at some simple things. It's not just about gross revenues, but also profitability. And I find this so interesting when I talk with business owners and clients about, their pricing, and we ask when they last adjusted their pricing. Very often, they're not looking at value-based pricing. They're looking at historical pricing. Well, we've always charged this amount. And despite what's happening with inflation or the economy or the marketplace, they don't revisit their pricing, or they view it as a commodity, as opposed to viewing themselves as the only solution provider in a certain niche that can create the pricing as they see fit and can dial in around value. So I had a client I was working with who she went out on her own as a solopreneur, created a 6-figure business. It took her less than a year to figure this out. And she had people reaching out to her asking, can you teach me how to create this part-time solopreneur 6-figure business? And so she was asking me how to approach the pricing because her thought was, well, I'll go out there for a day. I'll teach them. Here's what I think I should charge per hour. And I have to cover my own flights and my accommodations. And she's doing the math, figuring, okay, maybe I charge like $1,000 and then I'll use that to cover my flights and everything else. And I'm looking at her asking, why are we talking about what you would charge per hour? Aren't you showing someone all the lessons you learned in creating a 6-figure part-time solopreneur business? Isn't that the value that they can get that business in a box? Isn't that worth like a lot more? So from our conversation, we put a 0 on the end of that price. And that's when I got the nickname Jeremy at a 0 Shapiro.
Nice.
And she went out there and pitched this idea of instead of being 1,000, being 10,000, and they cover all of her travel costs, expenses, everything else.
Sure.
And of course they said, sure, no problem, which tells us there was a lot of price flexibility there. She probably could have gone higher, right? No. But at the very least, we 10x what she was going to be charging by looking at the value she was bringing, not just what she thought her own time was worth. And very often for business owners, we don't revisit that price. So if we look at that same model of that $50 a month subscription, let's say that our all-in cost of goods is $40, right? So our profit margin is 10. Now, what if we increase that price from $50 to $60? We've increased our monthly cost to our customers by only 20%. However, we have 2x our profit. So I know for many of our listeners, they're thinking, but I'll convert less customers, I'll lose customers and so forth. Well, we just doubled the profit in your business. How many of your customers could you afford to lose and have less overhead, but still far more profit? And the reality is in our testing over time, and again, I'm a big fan of testing, you're not going to lose a tremendous amount of customers by a modest price increase, but you can dramatically increase the profitability of your business.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Speaking of price increases, scalability, it's almost like, Jeremy, we can't have a conversation in late 2025, 2026 without talking about the impact of AI. So the clients and the audiences that are coming to you for this, I'm sure they're saying, well, Jeremy, is there a way that I can increase my efficiency, my effectiveness, not by adding headcount or not by adding a lot of overhead, but by leveraging AI? And I know it varies on a case-by-case basis, but in general, what is your philosophy about using AI as a strategic competitive asset?
Yeah, a lot of businesses that I work with, like most businesses these days, are using AI in a number of different creative ways in their business, right? It's unusual. I've seen people just entirely replace headcount and have AI take over a job in full.
Yeah.
More commonly, I see it as an assistive role. It's helping people to do the things they're already doing in the business more effectively.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is a really powerful way for business owners to effectively buy back time in their business. Because the biggest thing that helps us to grow so often, especially earlier on, is getting out of our own way, is handing tasks that we're doing off to someone, or in the case of AI, something or someone, to do instead. Right? I was working with a business owner who had a business that was serving retail stores. And his clients, if there was a problem with his product, couldn't process transactions or bring in money from the customers in their store.
Yeah.
So he felt this need as the business owner to effectively be on call at all times for his customers. This was a guy who loved getting out in the outdoors. He was a mountain biker, loved the fresh air. It was not just good for him physically, it was good for his mental well-being and everything as well. But wouldn't you know, out in the mountain biking areas he would go, there wasn't always good cell phone coverage. So as a result of feeling attached to this business and to the front line of his customers, which, by the way, like having pride in your business and wanting to be there for your customers is a good thing. But this was adversely affecting not just his physical, but mental well-being as well. So when we looked at, well, where are you spending your time and how do we get you that time back? That came down to bringing on a full-time outsourced customer service rep. So for 40 hours a week, there was somebody else there answering the phone, responding to emails and chats, and being there for customers. That got him the time back that he could step away for the business.
Yeah.
Of course, could go to the mountains, get some mountain biking and fresh air and all that, a little bit. That was important. But also he could go back to other things in the business, like handling outbound sales, product development, marketing, all these things he could do in the business to grow it because he wasn't being there responsive and having to answer a phone and an email. And that was one simple, easy hire. Now, can you do that with AI? Yes, right? Can he take the same challenges he was having from a growth standpoint to getting his time back and have AI help out in 100 different ways? Absolutely, yes. And so that's very common in businesses that AI brings on an assistive role to help a business owner get their time back.
Wait. We're not just going to listen to this episode. There are downloads, there are resources, there are links, there are bonuses waiting for you on this episode's page when you go over to doitmarketing.com/podcast. That's right, doitmarketing.com/podcast. Grab the notes right under this episode. See you over there.
Let me ask you about your own adventures in building out your platform, and you just have the book that just came out. I think today, our day that we're recording this, is your book's 1 month birthday.
Yeah,
is that correct?
It's been a long time in gestation, and then yes, about a 1 month anniversary at this point.
Yeah, congratulations. So you have a 1 month old baby. That's awesome.
Right.
How was the writing process for you? You and I are both fans of the useful books community. Did you do beta reading, or kind of give us the stages and phases of how this book came together?
So I live out here in beautiful, sunny, wonderful Silicon Valley, California, where the mantra is always ship fast, get an MVP, get something out there, fix it in post, as it were. And having had many software businesses over the years, you generally ship a minimum viable product that customers can start using. And if there's issues or bugs come in, you fix them as you go. And that's fine. Book publishing is very different because when you ship your book, it's on the bookshelf you have behind you or I have behind myself, right? These books live there. You can't reach into someone's bookshelf in the middle of the night and change things out. If only we could, right? And so that led me, from this idea of having a book and uploading it to Amazon and being done in a few weeks to realizing the writing was actually the easy part. The writing came naturally. This is all stuff I've done for so long. It's second nature. I present on this. I run workshops with it. I do this one-on-one. Putting it to paper, I actually found enjoyable, cathartic, wonderful, and that part was easy.
Yeah.
What I quickly learned was the actual writing was maybe 1.5% of the time involved in getting a book out there. And someone, made the wonderful, terrible move of handing me that book, write useful books. And as I cracked into it, I realized how important it was to write this book more in public and with an audience on that journey with me.
Yeah.
And that brought up this theme, which was so important to me during this pre-publication time. And that word is intentionality. This isn't just writing a book. It's writing a book with intention and purpose.
Yeah.
And when you figure out from that Write Useful Books process who your ideal reader is and what their profile looks like, not just in a few words or bullet points, but in an exhaustive profile, you now have this avatar that you can both attract and repel those who aren't. And so I use that process to publicly, with this list that grew over that pre-launch period, get early feedback, take early looks at the draft, answer questions. The book titling was thoroughly well researched, right? Your Business Growth Playbook was the culmination of a few hundred prospective titles based on a lot of research and surveys and refinement. The subtitle had hundreds more permutations that we worked through and workshopped and got feedback on. So there's so much intentionality in the title, the subtitle, the cover design, the categories, the keywords, the description, all of it. And that's not to mention the actual core content in the book and everything that went into it. All the content there, this is tried and true and tested out there in the real world tactics that have been used by my clients over the years, for me and my businesses over the years, and by our beta readers during that beta reading process.
Yeah.
Right. So the whole writing journey, publication journey, as it were, was so eye-opening and educational. And I learned a ton. But the most valuable thing is writing with intention, getting early feedback so that when the book comes out, you already have that feedback heard, implemented, responded to, and addressed, and you have a far more finished product getting out there in the marketplace.
Yes. So I know people reading the book are going to read the book and they're going to go, okay, I think I need some help with this. So in the Jeremy Shapiro empire, what are the investable opportunities? How do you work with clients? What are some of the ways that you can help people to implement some of this and get unstuck?
Yeah, so one of the things I cover in the book is something I've seen experientially myself so much. And for any of our service-based businesses where you're providing services for clients or our education-based businesses, this will probably resonate with you as well. But generally, your services can break down to sort of three different tiers, right? There's the do-it-yourself tier, right? We've got Home Depot for that. They're going to give you the things and the free Saturday workshop so you can go figure out how to wrench and work on your own plumbing, electrical, and woodwork. That's great, right? And there's a marketplace for that. Me as a consumer, I'm very much a DIY guy. I want to know how to do it so I can get out there and get it done. And that's wonderful, right? You also have your done with me tier. For any of our business owners who are coaches, right? Or work with a coach, that is a done with me. You're doing something, but you've got someone you can go to and you can work with and ask questions one-on-one. It's not just this one-way direction of information. That's the done with me. And your top tier, this is the done for you. These are our consultants, the ones who you bring in to get something done in the business, right? These are the agencies you hire to execute, right? These are the vendors you bring on that cover the work in a certain area of your business, right? So these are these three common tiers. And so my goal is that this book very thoroughly covers that entire DIY tier. If you want to know what the tactics are, I hold nothing back. I share with you everything that you can do to move each of those three levers in your business, the case study for it, the how to do it, the best practices, and all of that. Now, to answer your question, in the ecosystem with me, there are always going to be people who say, this is great, I know how to do it, but can you help me along with that? And so I have a blueprint discovery call. And so this is for folks who want help putting together their action plan. In the book, as well as online in the resource area, you can create your own action plan. I walk you through it step by step so you can walk away with that plan of exactly what to do. And that's part of the book. But for some folks, they want to have a conversation around that, get my input and feedback on that, have my team help out with building that blueprint and creating that actual action plan and having some accountability. And that is a service that we have that's available. And of course, at that top tier, like we were just talking about, there's also the done for you. Sometimes a business owner just wants something implemented and done in their business, and they want the result. Not the knowledge, not the assistance, but the actual result. And so for a handful of select boutique clients, we actually do the implementation and execution of those tactics as well. But my goal is not just to give you the why and the what, but also the how.
Yes. You know, it's funny. I think you and I have this next thing in common. One of the highest compliments that I've ever gotten of any of my books, programs, whatever. This client said to me, you know, David, a lot of times you read a book or you do an online course or you hire a coach and you say to yourself, okay, that's great. Now what? And this woman says to me, your programs, your books, your coaching is 100% now what?
Yeah.
And I think, Jeremy, your book and your programs and your coaching are also 100% now what? It's like not just leaving you hanging, but actually fulfilling the promise.
So I got the nickname, another nickname I got years ago was Jeremy Check the Box Shapiro. I'm the kind of guy, when I go to a conference and I take notes, I'm not just writing down what the speaker said or whatever else. Like every item I write down next to it has a little square. And when I make that little box, I've got to go back and check that because I've now committed to myself on paper, this is something I'm going to get done. So that's how I've run my notes for near 30 plus years. And so that actually even shows up in my book. At the end of every chapter, we have a whole put it into action section. Yeah. So at the end, this isn't just a recap of the points in the chapter. It is the questions to ask and the things to do so you can take the concept we just talked about and put this into action right now in your business. And so my hope also is that readers walk away with just like the reader you were talking about there and say, I knew what to do next. I wasn't left hanging or wondering. We make it super clear on what's next.
Yes. Totally fantastic. Well, as we're landing the plane, two final questions for you. The final question is where and how can people get more Jeremy Shapiro brilliance? But before we get to that, if folks were to take one overarching idea from our concept today about growing and scaling a business, breaking through the plateaus, escaping the hustle culture, what do you hope that one overarching concept might be?
You know, we've touched on this a few times without naming it on the nose. And I'll share with you just a quick story that I cover more in depth in the book. But this is an old fable that goes back about Hercules and the wagoner. A wagoner being, the guy who drives the wagon with the oxen up front, and goes to market. Well, one day this wagoner is going along and his wagon literally goes off the side of the road and into a literal rut. Like we talk about feeling like we're in a rut or our business being in a rut, etc. No, this wagoner is literally in a rut and could not get out. And so what does he do? He gets out and looks to the heavens and, calls to Hercules, Hercules, strength strong, right? And wants Hercules to come down and move his cart and get him back on the road and solve this for him. So Hercules comes down and goes over to the wagoner and is like, you're looking for my help. And the wagoner's like, yeah, like do something. Get me back on track here. And Hercules looks at the guy and is like, well, have you tried urging your oxen? Like, telling them, come on, oxen, let's go, and pull the wagon. Have you even tried leaning into your cart and pushing it to get it back on the road? Like, have you done anything? Or did you just throw your hands up to the heavens and ask someone to solve this for you? And so the wagoner is like, okay, leans in and starts pushing the cart and urges his oxen. And what do you know? He took some action and got himself back on track. So the takeaway from that story that I love is thematic in so many ways, but it comes down to implementing and taking action. Yeah. If you read any of the books on your shelf and walk away and say, hey, that was a good book, and then go back to what you were doing before you ever started reading that book, nothing's going to change. So whatever book you read, whatever conference you go to, whatever consultant or coach you hire, whatever it is, don't just receive information passively, actively read, listen, learn, and then take action. Create that plan and actually implement what it is you learned. That is the biggest thing I could encourage our listeners to do.
Agree 1,000%. 1,000%.
One might say they should do it.
You could say that. You could totally say that. We are in 110% alignment on the action piece for sure. So Jeremy Shapiro, how can people tap into, get connected, and stay connected to more brilliance, the book, websites, resources, downloads? What links should go in the show notes?
Everything you've just mentioned and more is all over on my website. That's yourbusinessgrowthplaybook.com, yourbusinessgrowthplaybook.com. You'll find the opportunity to get a bunch of the resources. You can even get a portion of the book, as well as some great tools that I have available for our listeners to help get you unstuck and back to the growth you deserve, as well as socials and everything else you need. That's all over at yourbusinessgrowthplaybook.com.
Excellent. All right, my friend. Well, as they say, you are my brother from another mother. We are totally in alignment on this. People need to absolutely click on those links in the show notes, grab a copy of Jeremy's book, follow what this man says, and hashtag do it, of course. And action creates results. It's amazing how that works.
Right.
So Jeremy Shapiro knows it, Hercules knows it, and now you, my friends, listening and watching, you know it as well. Jeremy, thank you so much for dropping all that value on us today.
Thanks for inviting me on. This was fun.
And that wraps up another episode of The Selling Show. Hey, tell you what, if you like us, rate us and review us on Apple Podcasts, subscribe, tell a friend, go grab the notes and downloads and extras at thesellingshow.com. See you next time.